This is Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 241, entitled Masculisting the Divorce Courts. Description. This flyer presents ideas on how the Masculists can menfair the feminazi-dominated divorce courts, one of the greatest criminal institutions on the planet today. Flyer itself. Masculisting the Divorce Courts by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer is concerned with ideas on what masculists need to do politically, intellectually, legally to reform the divorce courts so that they become fair to men. Today's divorce courts in Western countries are one of the most criminal organizations on the planet. They financially massacre one married father in 4, ripping his kids from him with 90% probability, stealing his house to give it to his fluffy ex-wife, plus half his possessions, forcing him to pay child support to kids he will barely see, and often, if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money of a man, he may be forced to pay alimony to her so that she continued to parasite him off after the divorce the way she did before the divorce, with no moral or legal obligation on her to FIP up, that is, become a FIP, financially independent person. That is, to get off her fat parasitic ass and become a financially responsible adult who stands on her own 2 feet and does not leech off the money of a man. These profoundly misandrist Western divorce courts were taken over by feminazi ideas in the 70s. They are now so toxic to men that young men choose to avoid marriage like the plague. They choose not to have kids and spend their money on themselves. Since the 60s, women have had the contraceptive pill, so can reliably choose to have their 0, 1 or 2 kids, which means they have a career window of some 40 years. The Masculists are now pointing the moral finger at women and telling them, quote, "Now that you women can work, you must work. Otherwise you remain parasites off men's money, and that will get you punished by not getting a man." Millions of men now have a contempt for fluffies, treating them as, quote, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out, not by killing them, but by ignoring them to death. Fluffies are left to rot on the shelf to extinction, so that their fluffy genes are removed from the gene pool. In a string of major Western countries now, 2/3 of young men under 35 refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. That is, they have gone MGTOW, men going their own way, in practice, if not in theory. The MGTOWs are growing so fast in numbers that probably within a decade the percentage of men who are MGTOWs will be over 90%, that's 90, thus causing the birth rate to plummet, and in time whole populations will be wiped out. So this is obviously an extremely serious situation. What can be done about this horrible state of affairs for men? The root cause of the problem is the influence of the feminazis, who have caused the gender politicians to vote in profoundly misandrist gender laws, particularly in the divorce courts, that favour women greatly at the expense of men. As a result, the divorce courts are now dominated by judges and lawyers who are feminazis, who don't care about the welfare of men, whom they often see as the enemy to be punished. No wonder that the Masculists, that's men's libbers, see these feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers as hated enemies. These feminazi divorce judges and lawyers need to be educated into masculist ideas so that they become aware of what they are doing of their massive criminality. They're financially massacring and destroying the lives of a quarter of married fathers, causing a casualty rate far worse than in a major war. No culture that ruins the lives of a quarter of its married fathers can survive. Something will have to explode to reverse the trend. Men have the power to stop women from having babies by withholding their sperm. This is now happening on a large scale. Women are complaining bitterly that they cannot find a man to commit to marriage and fatherhood. This is not surprising, given the awful toxicity of the feminazi-dominated divorce courts. Men are not fools. They see the damage done by the divorce courts to their fathers, their uncles, their older male friends, so that the large majority of young men today refuse to marry and have kids. They refuse to be financially massacred by the hated feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers, so they refuse to marry and have kids. It's a perfectly natural reaction on their part, a rational cost-benefit decision. Thus, the divorce court feminazi judges and lawyers have become genociders, wiping out whole populations, so obviously have to be stopped. In the limit, when the population seriously starts crashing, they will be murdered in large numbers, thousands of them. But before such a drastic solution is needed, what can be done now that is less violent and perhaps just as effective? I suggest that the divorce courts need to be masculisted, that is, taught masculist ideas, so that these feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers become conscious of what they are doing, so that they can make divorce settlements that are much fairer to men. Otherwise, they are signing their own death warrants. They will eventually be murdered. There are now millions of MGTOWs and Masculists around the world. Some of these MGTOWs are lawyers who can take it upon themselves to educate their fellow lawyers and judges in the divorce courts into MGTOW/Masculist ideas, so that divorce policy can be made menfair. For example, MGTOW/Masculist professors of divorce law can write books and pamphlets, etc., aimed at divorce court judges and lawyers, or publish MGTOW/Masculist articles in legal journals to teach the principles of MGTOW/Masculism. The feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers need to be taught that they are now genociders, and that it is in their self-interest, if they want to stay alive, that they menfair the gender laws. Not all divorce court judges and lawyers are feminazis. Some are males with traditional gender role expectations who see their financial massacring of men as the logical consequence of traditional gender roles. That is, traditionally, the man worked to pay for his wife to stay at home and raise her kids in a house that he paid for, because he is the one earning the money. The only change that happens after the divorce, as seen by such a conservative male divorce court judge, is that the divorcing ex-husband moves out of the house. The ex-husband continues to pay for his now ex-wife to stay in the same house raising her kids. The ex-husband continues to pay for her until she dies, and the kids are grown and out of the house. These traditionalist male divorce court judges need to be educated into masculist ideas, so that they have their view of the world changed, so that they become more sensitive to men's needs. These traditionalists need to be taught that women need to become fips or be punished by men, that fluffies are seen by masculists and increasingly by society as vermin, as immoral, parasitic, manslavers. They need to be taught that now that women can work, thanks to the pill, so now have 40 years of career time, they must work. Anything else is parasitism off the labour and money of a man. Masculists can put powerful moral pressure on these traditionalist male judges to become more moral, updating their old-fashioned gender role expectations so that divorce settlement decisions are made a lot more men-fair. For example, by making child custody joint by default, throwing out alimony, expecting women to fip up, the owner of the house gets to keep it, etc. The legal journals need to be bombarded by MGTOW/Masculist thinking so that these divorce court judges and lawyers are caught up in the times. That is, the expectation that men are no longer to be treated as subhuman cash machines. As for the feminazis academic persuasion applied to the conservative male judges and lawyers will probably not work, so stronger measures will probably be needed. One way will be for the masculists to take advantage of women's own group preference. That is, women are herd animals and tend to follow the female crowd. If the majority of women strongly want something, then the minority of women tend to toe the line with the rest of the women. Masculists need to push women very hard that if they don't vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, particularly the divorce laws, the bringing in the para, that's paternity rejection right, etc., then men will continue to boycott paternity, refusing to give women their sperm, so that women end up screaming for the menfairing of the gender laws in order to be able to have babies again. Enormous moral pressure coming from all sides of society, from masculists, from MGTOWs, from men in general, from female masculists, from ordinary women, needs to be placed on these criminal feminazi-dominated divorce courts, so that sheer collective social moral pressure forces them to reform the divorce laws. To create this massive social pressure, the masculists need to set up masculist groups in every high school, every college, every university. Masculists need to educate the broadcast media on masculist ideas so that these ideas are spread to the millions, the billions, the masses, so that everyone is familiar with them and can be influenced by them. There's a lot at stake. That is, the very survival of our populations, which will die out if the gender status quo continues. Things have to change. The divorce courts are just one aspect, one component of modern life. The players in the divorce courts are part of their society they live in. The masculists need to so change the zeitgeist regarding men's issues that the divorce courts feel the enormous social and moral pressure against them, and consequently adapt to that pressure by menfairing the gender laws. Otherwise, they'll be ostracized, and in the limit, if things don't change in the next few decades, they will be murdered as the population seriously starts falling. A severe population decline is a desperate situation that requires desperate measures to stop it. Thousands of murders of feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers would be sufficient to force the divorce courts to change their tune, but hopefully can be avoided by using social pressure instead. In my view, the most probable scenario is that feminism will die off due to it being hated increasingly by both sexes. Men hate the feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers for obvious reasons. It's the men who are the victims of the divorce courts. It's the men who are being financially massacred and having their lives ruined. It's perfectly natural and to be expected that men have a hatred of the divorce court judge and lawyer feminazis. Young women now are becoming increasingly conscious that they will not have a baby due to the boycott of paternity by the MGTOW's masculists. These women are being taught by the masculists that men are boycotting paternity because of the toxicity of the divorce courts, as caused by the feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers. So increasingly, young women are seeing these judges and lawyers as the root cause of their babylessness. And hence these young women are learning to hate these feminazi judges and lawyers as much as men do. These young women will then become female masculists in order to put pressure on the divorce courts and the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws, so that men are no longer financially massacred and have their lives ruined by a divorce. With both sexes pushing against the feminazis, they will have no hope and will die. Young women are learning today that it is social suicide to express publicly that they are feminists. Young men have such a hatred of feminazis that any young woman stupid enough to say to her social circle that she's a feminist will remain manless. No man wants a relationship with a misandrist, man-dumping, feminazi bitch. Such women are left rotting on the shelf. Feminism will acquire ever-increasingly negative connotations until it effectively dies out. Once that happens in the next few years, given the rapid rise of MGTOW and the size of the paternity boycott, the divorce court feminazis will feel the enormous social pressure against them and will toe the line. If they don't, they will be murdered by extremely angry and bitter divorced fathers who have lost their kids and their money, who have a burning hatred for these feminazi bitches who care nothing for the well-being of men. The divorce courts are the main target of the Masculists, rather analogous to the right to vote for the suffragettes early in the 20th century. So much depends on men fairing the divorce courts, because most of men's gender problems derive from the massive injustices committed against them in the feminazi-dominated divorce courts. The rise of MGTOW is due largely to the toxicity of the divorce courts. Women are being deprived of babies indirectly due to the divorce courts. Women are being rejected en masse by MGTOW men due largely to the toxicity of the divorce courts. Men fairing the divorce courts is thus centre stage and needs to be taken very seriously. It's a cause célèbre and even a causa bellum, that is, a cause for a sex war, that may result in thousands of divorce court feminazi judges and lawyers being murdered if they don't men fair the divorce laws. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channels De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers, and De Garis Essays. Ciao.